Today's episode is brought to you by motza.
SoundCartel.
No one likes getting into legal disputes, but when you're running a business, things can happen and lawyers can be heard marching in the distance. But do we need them? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. If you find yourself in a legal bind, can you do without lawyers? That's often difficult when the daggers have already been drawn. While heading straight to court might yield a satisfying result, it's not for the faint-hearted, certainly in terms of cost. But there is a middle ground, says Paul Brennan of Brennan Solicitors, one that should always be considered, and that is mediation. Apart from anything else, Paul says, it can save you money.
Look, it can be a cheaper option, and I wish it was something that people would go into right away, but most people don't seem to be ready for it. They normally spend a bit of money, but it saves so much money. The real costs in litigation come the nearer you get to a trial. And what we were finding in the law for centuries is that people would get up to the court door, and most cases would settle at the court door. And the thought was, why not try and do this a bit earlier?
Well, take us through the mediation process, Paul, because it's basically more lawyers, isn't it?
Well, in some ways it is. Look, you don't have to be a lawyer to be a mediator, but often lawyers who represent you will recommend other lawyers. I think if mediators had any one characteristic in common, it would be that they're a bit strange. And so therefore accountants also can be very good mediators, and other people too. So what happens is the parties attend the mediator's office usually. They normally set aside a day for it, or maybe a half day, but I've always found it normally takes a day. They start off, all the parties in one room, maybe the first time they sat in one room since the whole thing started. And it seems to be steeped in tradition. One of the big traditions seems to be is paying the mediator up front his fee. And also another thing is that nothing used in the mediation, no admissions made, can be actually used in court. And often it's said beforehand that only one person speaks at a time, because otherwise you can have quite an argument. But normally people are fairly civilised in these particular mediations. You'll find by this time that there'll probably be 10 or more people in the room, because normally the defendants arrive and you'll normally have a barrister there, and you as the solicitor will be there, and normally there's advisors, maybe an accountant. So there'll be a lot of people in the room. And your normal stance is to be a little bit like the opening scene of the Magnificent Seven. You all sort of walk fairly tough. The mediator then lectures you on what I think you might best describe by Monty Python as the bleeding obvious. He'll say things like, look, it can finish today. And that's quite attractive for people who've been fetching documents and making statements and staying awake at night over litigation. He'll also say there's no winners or losers in mediation. Everybody walks off and feels a bit hard done by. If you don't decide to finish it on that day, then quite honestly, the mediator will tell you can all go back and get into your bunkers and start firing again. He also tends to make the point that it's a very big surprise if judges decide 100% in your favour. And he will have had copies of the documents beforehand, and he can say this because judges, they're a little bit unpredictable, although they follow legal precedent. And there tends to be uncertainty for the parties right up to the trial. So this is his opening salvo. He'll sort of say this, and it makes all the parties just think, oh, it'd be better if it was done today. Then the lawyers on each side will make a submission. Now, these can either sound a bit like the opening of Zulu, or it can sound a bit like a budget speech, depending on your lawyer. Often this is the stage where you can have perhaps a crazed interjection by one of the parties, and it's best to say something really insulting. It might cost you more to settle at the end of the day, but something like "you slippery two-faced toad" is good, or more humorously, "you couldn't lie straight in bed." It may cost you a few thousand more, but litigants really sort of enjoy this sort of thing. So then all the parties are split up into two rooms, and once alone, the mediator will come into your room and tell you what a rubbishy case that you've got. And if there's a wall there, then you'd hear the mediator going into the other side and telling them what a lousy case they've got and how they'll be wasting their time. So then the mediator will step back and he'll either slip between room to room like Henry Kissinger and try to get a settlement. Some of them prefer to step back to another room, a bit like a sort of a Catholic model of confessional, and wait for people to come with their offers. But normally someone starts off with an offer, and this is normally met with rage and the suggestion that you can't be serious, and then the offers tend to go back and forth, and finally quite often there's so little between the two offers at the end of the day that the parties see the sense in settling it. It could take the lawyers a couple of hours to commit it to a written agreement, because really you need to have it in writing at the end of the day. You don't want anything to be up in the air after there's been agreement, and then it all finishes. Now, they both may walk away feeling that they've been done, and maybe mediators prefer it that way, but certainly it will have finished.
Well, you say, Paul, that basically there are no absolute winners or losers in mediation. So not an entirely satisfactory process then?
Well, the mediator will be very, very satisfied if both parties going away feeling that they have been done. And a good end to the mediation would be the opposing party walking out the door and being knocked over by a bus. But what tends to happen, you both walk away, and over the exceeding weeks and months, all of a sudden you come to the realisation, thank goodness it's ended, and you got out of it probably more cheaply and with everything intact. There hasn't been a court ruling where you've been found to be in the wrong. You have stood up to your opponent, and hopefully you don't have to see them anymore and you can get on with your life.
That was Brennan Solicitors Principal, Paul Brennan. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.